in the small village of Yorodo, a place where the earth itself seemed to awaken before the people, there was one man who stood out, Aro. While the rest of the village worked tirelessly in the fields, Aro had perfected the art of avoiding work. The moment the sun began to rise, the sound of birds calling, the rustling of women sweeping their compounds, and the scent of fresh earth in the morning air signaled the start of the day for everyone except Aro. He would roll over in his bed, cozy and content, escaping the harsh demands of farm life. The people of Yorodo believed that the earth respected those who respected hard work, and every man in the village understood that if you worked the land, it would reward you with abundance. But Aro, he was different. He lived in a small mud house at the edge of the village, just where the bush began to take over the path. Tall, handsome, and strong. Aro had everything the village men could wish for, except one thing. He was allergic to effort. If laziness were a profession, Aro would have been the CEO. Each morning, as the village came to life, Aro would stretch and yawn, always late to join the work that everyone else was already doing. His mind wandered to his dreams of becoming rich without lifting a finger, a dream he shared often but never acted upon. One morning, Mama Yubi, a village elder, passed by Aro's house with a basket of fresh leaves on her head. She saw him lounging under the shade of a mango tree, barely awake. "Aro, have you finished sleeping for the government today?" she asked, with a knowing smile. Aro stretched lazily, his eyes half closed. "Mama Yubi, sleep is part of good health," he replied. Mama Yubi shook her head. "Your mates are out there working the land, and here you are, cultivating sleep." "Don't worry, Mama," Aro said, grinning. "One day I'll be rich, and you'll remember these words." Mama Yubi burst out laughing. "In this village, without hard work, not even palm wine finds its way into a calabash by itself." Aro chuckled, unfazed. He was used to the teasing. He'd always believed that one day, somehow, things would work out without effort. But the villagers weren't the only ones who noticed Aro's peculiar lifestyle. His cousin Tiso, a dedicated farmer, passed by on his way to the fields. Seeing Aro lounging about as usual, he stopped in front of the house and shook his head. "Aro, you're still here?" Tiso asked, his voice filled with disapproval. Aro looked up, raising an eyebrow. "Where else would I be but here, on your farm?" Tiso frowned. "A farm that every man is supposed to have. Farm work is too stressful," Aro said with a wave of his hand, dismissing the idea entirely. Tiso laughed once, a sound that echoed with experience. "The earth won't feed you just because you're handsome." Aro stretched and leaned back against the mango tree, smiling lazily. "One day I'll make money without suffering like you. Just wait and see." Tisa looked at him, shaking his head with a mix of disbelief and concern. "You've been saying that since you were 15. Meanwhile, Mama Yube, who had been eavesdropping nearby, couldn't help but laugh. "This boy believes wealth will just knock on his door like a visitor." Despite their laughter and warnings, Aro remained unbothered. He had big dreams, but not the hard work to go with them. The days passed, and while the farmers toiled under the hot sun, Aro spent most of his time dreaming, lounging under the mango tree, and avoiding any responsibility. But then, something changed. It was a small event, but it would set off a chain of events that no one in Yorodo could have predicted. One afternoon, as Aro sat under the mango tree again, a young woman named Eve passed by. She was on her way to the village market to sell peppers and okra. "Ever felt like you're stuck in a rut, just floating through life without any real purpose?" That was me. My name is Aro, and for the longest time, my daily routine was wake up, scroll through my phone, maybe watch some TV, and then wonder where the day went. I was the king of procrastination, the master of doing absolutely nothing. My friends would be out there, building careers, traveling, living their lives, and I was just existing. I felt a growing sense of emptiness, a quiet desperation that I tried to ignore, but it was always there, humming in the background. One afternoon, while visiting my grandparents, I was sitting on their porch, once again, lost in my phone. My grandpa came out, his hands covered in dirt, a big smile on his face. He'd just finished planting his summer vegetable garden. He looked at me, then at the sprawling fields around his house, and said something that hit me harder than I expected. Oro, this land has been in our family for generations. It's given us everything, but it needs someone to listen to it. To work with. Italiano. All this potential, just waiting. He wasn't judging me. He was just stating a fact. But in that moment, I saw it. I was just like that unused land full of potential, but just waiting. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my head. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I woke up with the sun. I went out to the garden and found my grandpa. I simply said, "Show me." And he did. He taught me how to feel the soil, how to know when it needed water, how to tell a weed from a seedling. It was exhausting. My bike itched. My hands were blistered, and I was covered in mud. Every part of me wanted to quit and go back to the couch. But for the first time, I felt alive. I was tired, but it was a good kind of tired. A satisfying ache that came from creating something, from nurturing life. Slowly, day by day, things started to change. I started waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wanted to see the morning dew on the leaves, to check on the tiny sprouts pushing their way through the earth. I traded my phone for a shovel, my TV shows for the sounds of birds and the rustling wind. I learned about crop rotation, companion planting, and the delicate dance of the ecosystem in our own backyard. It was more complex and fascinating than any show I'd ever binged. I started to see the world differently. I noticed the subtle changes in the seasons, the way the light hit the fields in the late afternoon. My world, which had been confined to a 4-inch screen, suddenly expanded to the horizon. My first harvest was a small one, just a few baskets of tomatoes, cucumbers, and some misshapen carrots. But holding them in my hands, I felt a sense of pride I'd never known. I grew this. It took a bit of the earth, some water and sun, and I made food. It was a miracle. That small victory fueled a bigger dream. I started reading every farming book I could find, watching documentaries, and talking to other local farmers. My small corner of Grandpa's garden grew. The next season, it was a whole plot. Then, I took a leap of faith. The challenges were immense. There were droughts, pests, and equipment that broke down at the worst possible times. There were days I was so tired and frustrated I just sat in the middle of the field and wanted to give up. The old lazy arrow was still in there, whispering that the couch was so much more comfortable. But then I'd look at the rows of green, growing things, and remember why I started. I wasn't just growing vegetables. I was growing myself. Each challenge was a lesson. Each failure taught me resilience. The farm was teaching me patience, perseverance, and the profound connection between effort and reward. Now, a few years later, this is my life. That 1 acre has turned into a thriving small farm. I sell my produce at the local market, and I know my customers by name. People tell me how much they love the taste of my tomatoes, the sweetness of my corn. That feeling is indescribable. I wake up every day with a purpose. My work is hard, it's demanding, but it's real. It's tangible. I'm no longer just existing. I'm living. I'm contributing. I'm part of a cycle that's as old as time itself. Looking back, I realized that laziness wasn't my real problem. It was a symptom of feeling disconnected, of lacking a purpose. Finding farming, or rather, letting it find me, reconnected me to the earth, to my heritage, and most importantly, to myself. So if you're feeling lost, like you're just floating along, maybe you don't need a new app or another distraction. Maybe you just need to get your hands a little dirty. You never know what might grow. Thanks for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd love it if you'd subscribe and follow along on my journey. There's always something new growing here, he said, almost as if he were announcing a great achievement. Mama Yubi stared at him for a moment, eyes wide with disbelief. Your what? My farm? Aro repeated, smiling. Mama Yubi burst out laughing so loudly that the corn almost fell from her hand. This boy has started telling professional lies, she exclaimed. Tisoaro's cousin appeared from the path, carrying fresh leaves on his shoulder. What is happening here? He asked, looking between Aro and Mama Yubi. Mama Yubi pointed at Aro. Your cousin says he now has a farm. Tiso raised an eyebrow and looked at Aro, his expression a mixture of disbelief and concern. Which farm? Aro grinned and pointed in the direction of the forest. In the forest. The abandoned land. Tiso's face changed instantly. His expression became serious. You went there? He asked, his voice low. Yes, Aro replied confidently. Tiso stared at him for a moment, then sighed deeply. That place is cursed. People stopped farming there for a reason. Aro waved his hand dismissively. I'm not afraid of old stories. The land will respect me, he said, trying to brush off the warnings. But Tiso was not convinced. I told you before, don't disturb that place. That evening, Aro sat alone under the mango tree, reflecting on the day's events. His mind kept wandering back to the farm, to the soil, to the abandoned shrine. Something about it seemed different. Maybe the earth truly did respect him. He felt a strange connection to the land, like it was waiting for him to make it thrive. As the moon rose in the sky, Aro's curiosity got the best of him. He stood up slowly and grabbed his lantern. Maybe it was the promise of a better life, or the possibility of something magical happening. But Aro decided to return to the forest that night. He picked up his lantern, and with a nervous excitement, began walking toward the farm. The path was dark, and the forest seemed to be holding its breath. The sounds of the village had faded, and only the distant calls of birds and insects filled the silence. As he reached the farm, he stood still for a moment. The air was cool, and the land felt strangely alive, as if it had been waiting for him. The abandoned shrine stood silently in the middle of the land, its broken clay walls barely visible in the moonlight. Aro moved cautiously across the farm, the lantern casting eerie shadows as he walked. As he approached the ridges he had created earlier that day, he froze. The soil was moving. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, but then the ridges shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the soil itself was slowly rising and falling, as if something beneath the earth was stirring. Aro's heart raced. He stepped back slowly, his breath catching in his throat. What was happening? Then the sound came of faint scraping, like something was digging beneath the soil. Aro's mind spun with thoughts of strange spirits or forces beyond his understanding. But as he watched, the ridges began to adjust themselves. The soil packed itself tighter, and the plants seemed to grow stronger. The cassava stems stood taller, their leaves more vibrant. Aro was paralyzed with shock. Was this magic? Was it possible that the land was responding to him? The voice of his ancestors, Mama Ubi's warnings, and Tiso's advice all came rushing back to him. But the land was growing stronger, and Aro couldn't ignore the feeling of triumph. It was working. His laziness, his disbelief, and his doubt had somehow given way to something that he could not understand. But it was real. His farm was alive in a way he had never seen before. Aro stepped closer to the broken shrine, his eyes wide in disbelief. He whispered, "Thank you," as though the land itself could hear him. As he walked back to the village, a strange calm settled over him. He didn't know what had happened that night, but he knew one thing. His farm was different, and so was it. The next morning, when Aro returned to the village, the first thing Mama Yubi noticed was his smile. It was not the lazy grin of a man who had been sleeping all day. No, this was the smile of someone who had seen something extraordinary. "You went to your farm?" she asked, eyeing him curiously. "Yes," Aro said proudly. "And it's growing well. Better than anyone expected." Mama Yubi laughed. "Your farm. Growing well. In 3 days. My son, you've been sleeping your whole life, and now you think you're a farmer." But Aro simply smiled. "The land respects me," he said confidently. As the days passed, word spread through the village. Aro's farm was growing faster than anyone's could. His crops were healthy, the soil was rich, and the land seemed to be rewarding him in ways no one could explain.